Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Awesome Albums with Awesome Andrew. Today we are continuing the story of 50 years of Led Zeppelin. Last time we talked about the end of the Yardbirds, the creation of the band, and their debut album. Today we're going to pick up where that story left off and talk about their widely anticipated second album, Led Zeppelin II. Before getting started, I'll refresh you on the band. Jimmy Page on guitar, theremin, and backing vocals. Robert Plant on lead vocals and harmonica. John Paul Jones on bass guitar, organ, and backing vocals, and John Bonham on drums and backing vocals. Our story begins in the spring in 1969. Led Zeppelin was on tour promoting their first album that had come out in January. They first toured the UK, which they did okay there, but it was the US who better appreciated them. The band exploded with popularity in the States. This time they were the headline acts and started filling larger venues, eventually filling stadiums. The band completed 4 European tours and 3 American tours as well. Atlantic Records wanted to take advantage of their huge success and were eagerly waiting for the band's next album. They processed 400,000 advanced orders for the band's second album. That's right, even before the album was even made, there were over 400,000 people ordering it. They were so big in the States and even got invited to play at Woodstock, which turned 50 years old this year. However, Zepp manager Peter Grant turned them down because he had other tour ideas in mind, but he also didn't want them competing with The Who, Jimi Hendrix, Jefferson Airplane, and Sly and the Family Stone. Grant said, "I said no to Woodstock because I knew we'd just be another band on the bill," end quote. Now, unlike their first album that only took about 36 hours in the span of a few weeks, this album was an 8-month endeavor. They would write, record, and mix songs while on tour. Jimmy Page recalled writing songs in hotel rooms while promoting their first album. He said, "It was quite insane, really. We had no time and we had to write numbers in hotel rooms. By the time the album came out, I was really fed up with it. I just heard it so many times in so many places, I really think I had lost confidence in it," end quote. Robert Plant said something similar. "It was crazy, really. We were writing numbers in hotel rooms, and then we do a rhythm track in London, add the vocal in New York, overdub the harmonica in Vancouver, and then come back to finish mixing in New York," end quote. Wow, that's a crazy situation. Some of the songs originated improvising while on tour, some of it during instrumental sections of Dazed and Confused, and were mostly recorded live in the studio like the first album. Since the band didn't really release singles, they relied a lot on the BBC. John Paul Jones said in 1997, "In those days there was a thing called needle time, when the BBC only allowed to play 4 or so hours of gramophone records per day, and so if you didn't get played on the top 40 radio, which was 2.5-minute singles, which we didn't do, the only other outlet was to do these shows where we were allowed to expand and play like 5, 6, 7-minute songs. So yeah, it was quite a big deal, and it was a way to get the music to the audience that couldn't make the gigs, perhaps," end quote. They appeared 3 times in 11 days on the BBC playing songs from their first album and previewing songs for their upcoming second album, and a few songs that you can only hear on the BBC, like their cover of Traveling Riverside Blues, a great cover of an old Robert Johnson song. Several songs including Thank You, The Lemon Song, and Moby Dick were overdubbed during the tour, while the mixing of A Whole Lot of Love and Heartbreaker were also done on tour. Page said, "In other words, some of the material came out of rehearsing for the next tour and getting new material together," end quote. Next up was A&R Studios in New York. During the tour, Page reconnected with engineer Eddie Kramer, who knew Page and Jones back when he was at Olympic Studios when the two were just session musicians in the mid-60s. Kramer later recalled, "John Paul Jones was the first to make me aware of Zeppelin when he told me he was joining a group with Jimmy Page. This was before I left England to work in the US. First time I saw them was the Fillmore East. They were sensational. I'd known both Jimmy and John Paul from working with them at Olympic and had followed their careers over the years. I periodically bumped into them, and then I was asked to work on their second album," end quote. Eddie Kramer worked with Jimmy Page to produce the album. Kramer said, "We cut some of the tracks in some of the most bizarre studios you can imagine, but in the end, it sounded bloody marvelous. There was one guy in charge, and that was Mr. Page," end quote. As the album started getting put together, there was definitely evidence of them evolving as musicians. It was still a blues-derived and guitar riff-based like the first one, but this is considered by many to be the band's heaviest album. I kind of disagree. While definitely heavier than their first, third, and fourth, I feel Presence would be their heaviest. At least Achilles' Last Stand and Nobody's Fault But Mine off that album, but I do agree this is one of their heavier albums. Although there are also hints of the acoustic style that mostly dominated their third album. 6 of the 9 songs were written by the band, but we also have a few reinterpretations and covers of Chicago blues songs by Willie Dixon and Howlin' Wolf, although those credits came later. after some lawsuits. I guess it's not a Zeppelin album without lawsuits. Jimmy Page had an interview with Guitar World in 1993. He said, "Well, as far as my end of it goes, I always tried to bring something fresh to anything that I used. I always made sure to come up with some variation. In fact, I think in most cases you would never know what the original source could be. Maybe not in every case, but in most cases. So most of the comparisons rest on the lyrics, and Robert was supposed to change the lyrics, and he didn't always do that, which is what brought on most of the grief. They couldn't get us on the guitar parts of the music, but they nailed us on the lyrics. We did, however, take some liberties, I must say, but never mind. We did try to do the right thing. It blew up in our faces. So if there was just any plagiarism, just blame Robert," end quote. One of the more interesting lawsuits, or whatever you want to call this, while they were touring, they made it back to Scandinavia, more specifically Copenhagen in Sweden. A woman there named Eva von Zeppelin, who claimed to be related to the famous Ferdinand von Zeppelin, the creator of the Zeppelin airships, had confronted the band in October, telling them they could not appropriate her surname without permission. Upon their return to Denmark, she threatened them once again. Realizing that sometimes a word has two meanings, Led Zeppelin gave in, releasing the statement, "We shall call ourselves the Nobs when we go to Copenhagen," end quote. The Nobs is a reference to Claude Nobs, founder of the Montreux Jazz Festival. I don't know how to respond to that one. Most of the lawsuits and legal issues against them are justified. This one, though, now that's dumb, especially if you can't prove it. Anyway, Led Zeppelin 2 was released October 22nd, 1969, debuting at number 15 in the US and soon displaced the Beatles' Abbey Road at number 1 on the Billboard album chart, which, knocking out Abbey Road is no easy feat. Now then, I say we talk about the album cover. In the US, some commercially duplicated reel-to-reel copies of Zepp 2 made by Ampex bore the title Led Zeppelin 2, the only way to fly, on the spine. The first thing we see is the vintage photograph. The artwork was created by David Juniper, a fellow student of Page's at Sutton Art College. Juniper was just told, come up with an interesting idea. That idea is based on a photograph of the, and I'm going to butcher this really bad, the Jagdstaffel 11 Division of the German Air Force during World War I, the flying circus led by the Red Baron. However, Juniper pasted the band faces over some of the people in the photograph. The blonde woman has debate on who she is. She could be French actress Delphine Seyrig in her role of Marie Magdalene in the film Mr. Freedom, which was a leftist anti-war satire by Willie and Klein in 1969, but Juniper said the woman was a girlfriend or muse of Andy Warhol, which I guess could be the same person then. She has been named Glyn Johns, a spoof of Glyn Johns, who engineered their first album. Others in the photograph were Peter Grant and Richard Cole, touring manager, as well as Neil Armstrong, and blind Willie Johnson. The Baron was removed from the photograph, as well as the plane in the photo, of course. Then you have the colorful title and clouds that were airbrushed on. Then, of course, you have some white space that continues on the back, which appears to be a silhouette of Zeppelin. Then there's the gatefold. I really like this picture. A giant gold Zeppelin mounted on top of this temple. It was inspired by a documentary film about German architects in the 1920s. Now then, I say we move on to the music. The album's opening track was built around a 3-note Page riff. Jimmy Page said he came up with the riff in the summer of 1968 on his houseboat. The lyrics were taken directly from a Willie Dixon song, You Need Love, which led to our first lawsuit on the album, a plagiarism lawsuit, eventually settled out of court. Willie Dixon sued the band in 1985. The court settled in favor of Dixon, though his wife insists he never received the fortune rumored to have been awarded, which was supposedly $7 million. Dixon's name had since been added to songwriting credit for the song. On top of that, in 1962, Muddy Waters recorded a blues vocal, You Need Love, for Chess Records, as he had done with You Shook Me. The Small Faces then did a cover of the song in 1966 for their first album. According to Steve Marriott, Page and Plant attended several Small Faces gigs when they expressed interest in the song. Plant's phrasing is particularly similar to Marriott's version. Marriott said, he sang it the same, phrased it the same, even the stops at the end were the same, end quote. Robert Plant said in an interview with Musician magazine, Page's riff was Page's riff. It was there before anything else. I just thought, well, what am I going to sing? That was it. A Nick. Now happily paid for. At the time, there was a lot of conversation about what to do. It was decided that it was so very far away in time and influence that, well, you only get caught when you're successful. That's the game, end quote. Kind of makes me concerned if I make it big with this channel. Are artists going to come after me demanding royalties or something? I'm not getting paid to do this, and Hopefully I'm just giving them free publicity. Seriously, artists, please don't come after me. I'm not making any money on this. I'm just trying to talk about music I love. Anyway, outside of this criticism I mentioned, this song is critically praised as one of the definitive heavy tracks, though the group had never considered themselves that style. It was also popular enough to be a single, in the US at least. It was cancelled in the UK because the band didn't want to do singles, but it was released in the US on November 7th, 1969 and reached number 1 in Australia and Germany, and number 4 in the Netherlands and the US. The single was certified gold on April 13th, 1970, having sold over 1 million copies. The middle section of the track contained a variety of overdubbed instruments and vocals, which were mixed by Page and Kramer, making full use of stereo panning and other consoles available on the desk. Kramer said, "The famous Whole Lotta Love mix, where everything is going bananas, is a combination of Jimmy and myself just flying around on a small console, twiddling every knob known to man," end quote. Jimmy Page said, "During the mix, with the aid of engineer Eddie Kramer, we did all the panning and adding the effects, including using low-frequency oscillators on the tape machine to really put the whole thing down and lift it back up so the sound is moving in rhythm. It was something no one had ever done before in that context, let alone in the middle of a song. That's how forward-thinking we were, that's how avant-garde it was, and that's how much fun we were having," end quote. If you listen on this track, you can hear the backward echo technique being used.
Way down inside, you need.
Going back to the single version didn't include any of this. For one, this section made the song too long for radio play, but more importantly, it was simply unfit to air on the radio, so for the single edit, they cut this part out. While this particularly edited version was only intended for the radio, this version had apparently been sold to customers as well as the intended single. This makes the radio edit a rare collector's item for fans. Rolling Stone ranked the song at number 75 on their list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. Q magazine rated it at number 3 in the list of 100 greatest guitar tracks. Rolling Stone had a similar list and placed it at number 11. VH1 ranked it at number 3, greatest hard rock song of all time. Listeners of the BBC Radio 2 voted it containing the greatest guitar riff of all time, beating Sweet Child of Mine at 2nd place and Back in Black in 3rd place. The song was also performed at every gig from June 1969 onwards. It was their closing number for a lot of their shows between 1970 through 73, often extended to form a rock and roll medley toward the end of the set. And lastly, it was the last song the group ever performed live with John Bonham on July 7th, 1980. Bonham died after midnight, September 25th, 1980, thus ending Led Zeppelin, outside of a couple reunion shows and one album with previously unreleased material.
And if I say to you tomorrow, take my hand, child, come with me.
This song was primarily written by Robert Plant. In fact, this was one of the first songs recorded by the band in which Robert Plant gets any writing credit at all. Because remember, he couldn't get any credit on their first album due to contractual stuff with Crystal's Records. The song features a variety of dynamics during the track, along with flanged vocals and wide-pan stereo guitars. The song made its full stage debut at the Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco on April 16, 1969. The song is also the first appearance of what is now Page's trademark Gibson Les Paul for recording, as well as the first appearance of Bonham's gong, which you can hear in the middle part among Jimmy Page's guitar riffs. According to rock journalist Stephen Davis, the author of the Led Zeppelin biography Hammer of the Gods, The Led Zeppelin Saga, the lyrics for the song reflect a romance Plant had with his wife's younger sister. A little messed up. This song was recorded at Mystic Sound in LA. Remember, they recorded this album all over the place. The song is a rearrangement of Howlin' Wolf's Killin' Floor, which had been a huge part of the group's live shows during 1969. Even after the song was dropped in late 69, the Squeeze My Lemon segment was inserted in the Whole Lotta Love medley and ad-libbed elsewhere. It was mostly recorded live and expanded to include new lyrics, including the sexually charged phrase of "squeezing my lemon," which was taken from that Robert Johnson song I mentioned earlier, Traveling Riverside Blues.
Sleep me, babe, till the juice runs down my leg.
This line can actually go a little bit further back than Johnson. Some people say that Johnson likely borrowed that from a song he heard that same year called She Squeezed My Lemon by Arthur McKay. Other lyrics in Lemon Song are a reference from Albert King's Crosscut Saw. When the song was played live, Plant often made up the lyrics and they were more sexually suggestive than Juice Runs Down My Leg, which some people were offended by the lyrics, but Zepp fans didn't seem to care. Like, the lyrics don't bother me at all. Next, I want to talk about the lawsuit. Yep, another one. In December 1972, Arc Music, owner of the publishing rights to Howlin' Wolf songs, sued Led Zeppelin for copyright infringement on the Lemon song. The party settled out of court, though the amount was not disclosed. Howlin' Wolf supposedly received a check for $45,123 from Arc Music immediately following the suit. And, of course, subsequent releases included him, Chester Burnett, as a co-writer. The final thing I want to say about the song is the final line. That floor, floor, floor was actually recorded live. Chris Hutton said, "The sessions came out great. Jimmy was very easy to get on with. We did the tracks live with Plant standing in the middle of the room with a handheld microphone. You can hear at the end of the Lemon song where Plant sings floor, floor, floor. That echo was recorded in real time," end quote. Some radio stations would play the song together with the Lemon song because there's not much of a pause between them on the album. When the song was played live, Jones would often improvise an extended organ intro. The song also features a rare acoustic guitar solo on a Vox 12-string guitar and Page contributing to backing vocals as well. Producer Rick Rubin remarked the song's structure. "The delicacy of the vocals is incredible. The acoustic guitar and the organ work together to create an otherworldly presence," end quote. This was written by Plant and is a love song for his wife, Maureen. This song makes it the first time that Plant wrote all the lyrics, and it is also this song that made Page realize that Plant can now handle the majority of the lyrics for the band's songs. Plant said, "I'd never really written a song until Zepp got together. So the crafting of lyric and melody was developing all the time. The writing process is quite personal and intimate, but working with Jimmy was very stimulating. He was my senior in every aspect, but the melding was so good, and by about the 8th song we wrote together, I began to realize that I had something with this guy that was very special. I was no longer just chancing it, so I was feeling better and better all the time." Led Zeppelin II was very virile. That was the album that was going to dictate whether or not we had the staying power and the capacity to simulate. It had changed color completely from the first album. It had become much more creative and imaginative, end quote. The song was ranked number 29 on the Rolling Stone 40 Greatest Led Zeppelin Songs of All Time, as well as the Fuse's list of 35 thank you songs at number 28, and Top Gibson's list of top 10 Thanksgiving songs.
If the sun refused to shine.
This line and When Mountains Crumble to the Sea came from a Jimi Hendrix song, If 6 Was 9. The last thing is the original LP pressings incorrectly listed the running time at 3:50, as the song features a false fade at that point, before ending with crescendo about 10 seconds later. The 2014 remaster lists the song at 4:49. The band opened with Heartbreaker in many of their shows in 1971 and 72 with Immigrant Song leading into Heartbreaker. In later concerts, it was often an encore song. Heartbreaker and Communication Breakdown were pretty much the only songs to be played during every year the band toured. Little fun fact for you. The song was written by Page as a way to showcase his guitar skills, including an unaccompanied solo in the middle of the song. I'd love to play more of this. It's such a great solo. Page said the guitar solo was actually recorded at a different studio, which explains why it sounds different. The song was recorded at A&R Studios in New York, and then the guitar solo was recorded at Atlantic Studios. Page also said this was the first recorded instance of his Gibson Les Paul Marshall stack combination. The guitar solo inspired many amazing artists to come, notably Steve Vai and Eddie Van Halen. Vai said in September of 1998, "This one had the biggest impact on me as a youth. It was defiant, bold, and edgier than hell. It really is the definitive rock guitar solo," end quote. Eddie Van Halen said, "I think I got the idea watching Jimmy Page do his Heartbreaker solo back in 1971. He was doing a pull-off to an open string, and then I thought, wait a minute, open string? Pull-off? I can do that, but what if I use my finger as the nut and move it around? I just kind of took it and ran with it," end quote. Livin' Lovin' Maid immediately follows Heartbreaker on the album, causing the two to be played together on radio stations. This acts as the B-side to Whole Lotta Love, hitting the Billboard charts, peaking at number 65 in April of 1970. There was a misprint by Atlantic Records, resulting in the original UK pressings being titled Livin' Lovin' Wreck, She's a Woman, with Wreck being corrected to Maid, and there was also that subtitle change on the US and later releases. It's also one of the few songs to feature Page on backing vocals. This was supposedly written about a groupie the band encountered while touring in the US. The song was almost never played live. The group really disliked the track, seeing it as little more than filler. And by the group, I mean mostly Page. Plant at least performed the song live on his 1990 solo tour. Another song that was almost never performed live, which is strange because it's a really popular Zepp song. It finally was at the Ahmet Ertegun tribute concert in 2007. Page ended the song with a brief section of What Is and What Should Never Be's bridge. Although Plant did perform this on his 1990 solo tour, and Plant and Page did it when they toured together in the mid-90s, there are debates on what John Bonham is hitting. Some people claim it's a Rubbermaid bucket, others say it's a guitar case, others say a plastic garbage can or the soles of his shoes. I feel like the only people who would actually know this are the other band members. Page explained this almost violin sound was achieved by using the neck pickup on his Les Paul with the treble cut and utilizing a sustained producing effects built by audio engineer Roger Mayer. The lyrics are heavily influenced by J.R.R. Tolkien. I met a girl so fair, but got her at the evil one. This song is one of many Zepp songs to feature Tolkien and Lord of the Rings references. Listen to Misty Mountain Hop and more noticeably Battle of Evermore, both from their fourth album. You know what? Just listen to the whole album. It's really good. And I also did a video on it a few years ago. Check it out. Robert Plant said, "When I read the books, they kind of dissolved into me. When I first came over to America and saw Frodo lips painted on walls, I thought that was beautiful. I just want to hold up my hand and say, okay, I was 21 when I wrote that," end quote. Lastly, the song was recorded at Juggy Sound Studio in New York City during the band's second concert in North America. In 2010, the song was ranked number 440 on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Songs of All Time. This instrumental piece was designed to showcase Bonham's drumming. There is a brief section with Jones and Page playing. Robert Plant doesn't sing at all, rather just introduce Bonham before they start playing.
John Henry Bonham, Moby Dick.
Page and Jones would play the tune's drop D blues bass riff with Bonham's drums as a power trio at the beginning of the song, and then they would just leave Bonham alone to do his thing. The guitar riff can be traced back to the BBC unused session track The Girl I Love She Got Long Black Wavy Hair, which was recorded in the summer of 1969. The solo is often played at concerts from the first North American tour in November of 1968, being his solo performance showcase on concert tours all the way through 1977. Over the years, it went through a few name changes. During the early years, 68-69, it was known as Pat's Delight, named after his wife. From 69 to 75, it was Moby Dick, of course named after the whale in the novel by Herman Melville. Then in 1977, it was known as Over the Top, where the piece had a different intro, where it has the opening riff to Out on the Tiles from their third album. The last time the piece was played was July 17, 1977 at the Seattle Kingdome. It can be found on various audio and video bootleg recordings. When played live, Bonham's drum solo can last as little as 6 minutes, or frequently as long as 30 minutes, while the rest of the band would leave the stage after playing their introduction. During the performance, he would set aside his drumsticks, whether it would be behind him or into the audience or whatever, and start playing with his hands, sometimes drawing blood. Rock stars are crazy sometimes. Then after that, Page and Jones come back to finish the song. The song starts off very bluesy and very true to the original piece, written by Willie Dixon, performed by Sonny Boy Williamson II. The song was originally credited as Page and Plant, now being credited for Dixon. I have no records about a lawsuit taking place, but I have a feeling that this was changed at the same time that Whole Lotta Love was. I mean, why would Dixon let you get away with one song and not another one? Oh yeah, this is when Zeppelin switches to their style. Love it! This song was frequently played at concerts, first appearing as an encore on the band's UK tour. From 1973, the song was dropped from their setlist. However, the middle section was often retained and served as the introduction to Black Dog, as seen on the band's concert film. The song remains the same. Which I must say, when I was watching that clip, I thought, wait a minute, they made a mistake. This isn't Black Dog, that's Bring It On Home.
Hey, mama said the way you move gonna make you sweat, gonna make you groove.
Oh, never mind, it is Black Dog? I was so confused. The end of the song goes back to the Sunny Boys' old blues version as the song quiets down and the song ends. Here's a bonus instrumental track that was on the companion disc of the 2014 release of the album. Unfortunately, I don't have anything to say about it, but I like it. And that concludes the album. Remember what I said at the beginning of the video, that there were over 400,000 advance orders for the album? Well, it certainly went way over 400,000 copies. That's child's play. Initially, the album was attacked harshly by critics. Billboard said that they were dreary and detached from the mainstream of contemporary rock music, or John Mendelsohn wrote a negative review of the album for Rolling Stone, saying, "Until you've listened to the album 800 times as I have, it seems as if it's just one especially heavy song extended over the space of 2 whole sides," end quote. Or Robert Christgau, the Village View, joked and said, "The best of the wah-wah mannerist groups, so dirty they drool on demand," end quote. And of course still saying all the songs sound alike. Well, that's why you don't listen to critics. On November 10th, 1969, the album was certified gold in the US for selling 500,000 copies. It sat there for 7 weeks, and in 1990, it was certified 5 times platinum for selling 5 million copies. By 1999, it had shipped out 12 million copies, making it at 12 times platinum, and that's still 20 years ago. And you can't forget about the 2014 remaster, which helped bring this album back on the Billboard Top 10 at number 9. And in the UK, the album sat in the LP chart for 138 weeks and eventually climbed to the top in February of 1970. The album, of course, is on so many lists like the Rolling Stones 2003 500 Greatest Albums of All Time at number 79, or number 41 on Mojo's 1996 100 Greatest Albums Ever Made list. It also reached number 3 on Guitarist Magazine's 1994 Most Influential Guitar Albums of All Time Ever. I can go on. I've got a list of how well it did on lists, but I think you get my point. This has been Awesome Ranger telling you that Led Zeppelin 2 is an awesome album, and I hope to see you in another episode.